at will. And then one of the siblings is a musician, so she's the feeling. And one of the siblings is brilliant in school and gets scholarships. And the fourth one, of course, is the athlete. And I just think it's so interesting that she has the four siblings, and they each one so beautifully typify a tool of maturity. By the way, just an aside on that, because I love to share these touching stories, is I read that aloud to 5th and 6th graders. And this girl in my class, her mother was not mentally ill, but not exactly stable. And so some years later, when she was like out of high school, but just barely, she was probably 18, I was driving in a rural area where I lived toward town, and I saw her hitchhiking. And so I picked her up, and we were chatting on the way to town, and I hadn't seen her in 4 or 5 years because they had moved away, and I found out that she wasn't living with her mother. And I'm not sure what all the circumstances were, but she was actually really homeless and living in a tent. And she brought up to me, she said, "Do you remember that book, Homecoming?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "I love that book." And this was an 18-year-old, of course. Why did she love that book? Because it was an example of someone meeting this kind of incredible tragedy and triumphing. Is that a word, triumphing? Being triumphant in the face of it. So, and then our read-alouds are one way that we bring so much feeling into the classroom, aren't they? And in that regard, when you're choosing read-alouds for the feeling years, it's so important to think not, oh, this book has a great lesson and it's set in the area that we're going to study, so I'm going to read it. Well, the most important thing is, what does it say to the heart? That's the first thing you want to lead with. What does it say to the heart? If it engages children's feelings and opens them up and makes them feel vulnerable when they identify with the character, then does it have an uplifting end? Or does it have at least an end where there's understanding and, like the book Shiloh. Do you know the book Shiloh, which is a more recent Newbery winner?
We're reading that now.
You're reading that now. And that's a book about a little boy who adopts what he thinks is an abused animal. And he hides it from his father because he knows his father won't let him keep an animal that's not, he steals it from someone who's abusing it, He steals it and adopts it and takes care of it and has it off from the house because he knows his father will tell him he can't steal a dog, but he feels he's saving it from this abuser. And as the book goes on, it's not so graphic that it's not graphic violence to the dog that would be harmful to a child, in my opinion. But you need to read it yourself before you read it to your own kids and see what you think. But one of the understandings he gets during the book was, of course, that this abuser was also abused, and that the issues are way more complex than he first thought. But it's very uplifting, I think, toward the end. It has a very uplifting ending. So in looking at our own preferred tools of maturity, and one of your homework assignments will be to really reflect a lot about that. There's a handout that you will be getting when you get your group of handouts to put in your binders that you'll be doing for homework, where you'll be looking at identifying your own tool. And why is it so important not only that you identify the tools of maturity in your class, so you can be sure you're speaking to those tools for each child and you're understanding the kids better. You can understand when a child just balks at PE, and you understand, they just don't like to put energy out in a physical way. It's not, how can I do a baby step to get them there, And for me, it's startling when someone doesn't want to put out energy intellectually. I remember talking to a PE teacher once. We were doing something at a track meet, and it just happened. This was a PE teacher. There's no correspondence here, okay? But just happened. And I mean, she was like Miss Dynamic Energy and coordinated and everything. And we were scoring something, and she was doing this cumbersome division, and I said, "Look, this is base 10. All you got to do is move the decimal over. You don't have to actually divide it by 10, just move the decimal over." And she said, "I can't think about that." And she kept on, it was like she couldn't, because it wasn't her preferred tool of maturity, and she was under stress. It was a time thing, we were trying to hurry. She wasn't going to put her energy into an intellectual vein because it just wasn't comfortable. and now I get it, because that's how I am. If you could go out and say, let's play tennis, Usha. Oh my goodness, don't put me with a ball. I have to react really quickly. Let's do yoga, okay? That's as physical as I want to get. So it helps us understand the children. It helps us address their needs, but also, and very importantly, knowing ourselves helps us see how we may not have as well-rounded a classroom as we hoped. Another thing about the 4 tools of maturity, people ask, how does this correspond to Howard Gardner's, what's the phrase I need? Multiple intelligences, thank you. The multiple intelligences theory, because public school teachers have known for a long time, this isn't quite right. I see kids who are really, really succeeding and doing well in school, who are really, and they're doing great, and they're getting all the praise. And there are all these other kids over here who are just as smart and just as creative in their own way. But because it's not mathematical intelligence or it's not verbal intelligence, they're not getting any recognition for it. And so people have jumped on this bandwagon of, and it's good, it's in the right direction, of 7 multiple, he started out with 7. I think he has 8 now, if I'm not mistaken. The multiple intelligences, which are verbal, spatial, mathematical, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. That is, relating to others and being able to be self-reflective. And I forget the other 2. And then he's added, since then, one of his criteria for intelligence is it has to be measurable. So he thought there must be a spiritual intelligence. And he did do a lot of research on that, but he found he couldn't really measure it accurately, so he isn't using that one. But he did come up with one called naturalistic intelligence, which would be like the Charles Darwin or the people who perceive detail and can create categories out of that detail. And he says, that might be the child that knows every make of car. It doesn't have to do with nature exactly, but that's one of his newer intelligences. But what I have found is that these 4 tools of maturity are more basic to human nature than those intelligences, and that if you really think about addressing each one and create a curriculum that addresses each one, you will automatically be pulling every intelligence and using every intelligence in the classroom. Helen, you had your hand up a while ago. What did you want to add?
I was going to say,
I'm sorry, I forgot to call on you right then.
No problem. Sometimes when you can't tell easily what the maturity tool is for you, many times it's will, because they seem to be good at everything. Yeah. And so, many times.
Anything else anyone wants to add? Yes, Glenda.
I found it interesting when I went through and answered those, then when you started talking about what they reflect. If you would have asked me which one I was, I would have said feeling. I'm very emotional, I'm very empathetic, I'm very nurturing, and I came out A every time. So what does that mean?
Well, it's only 3 questions. Take a look at the 6 or 8 activities you wrote down over the last year that you experienced joy, and think about each of those. Which tool of maturity is predominantly used for each activity? Now, that's not always all that easy, because gardening could be feeling or it could be body, But if you put working a crossword puzzle, it's going to be intellect or will, right? It's still 2 to choose between. Yeah. So, but look at those 2, and also if you haven't been thinking about this, it's hard to know right at the beginning. And as I said, you're going to have more sheets, more assignments, and more time to reflect on it. I do remember a staff meeting one time that we had where we were all talking about, this was our topic for the meeting, and so I created this activity where we each put our name at the top of a sheet of paper, and then at the bottom, whoever had that sheet, like I had my own, I would write what I thought my predominant tool was, and then I'd fold it up and pass it to the next teacher, and she'd look at my name, and she'd write just above that without looking what she thought my preferred tool. She folded up, passed it to the next, so that way we got to write on, each one of us wrote on everybody's. So it was so astounding, because we know each other really well. We worked really closely together over the years, and so they would come back and you would see, there's yours, and then 6 other people said something different. Or more often it was, maybe 3 people said one thing and 3 put that in something else too, But this was the funny part. There's someone on the staff who's not here, so that's why I can tell this story, that we all put intellect and he put feeling. And the funny thing is that he started to argue and come up with all these intellectual, complicated, verbal reasons to convince us that his predominant tool was feeling. And we were just laughing. So it is hard to know your own.
Yeah.
And this is going to be a month-long process of working with these. I don't know how many of you are finding it beneficial. I know Sonali said that was one of the things she liked best about the class, but when you send your journal entries in, and I post them on the website, and you read each other's and you read the insights people are having, I think that helps a lot. And we will be reflecting about this. Sonali, did you want to add? Somebody's hand was up back here.
I was just
Lorna.
going to say quickly, when you're looking at motivation for those answers, when you look at black and white answers, it sometimes doesn't make any sense. I know my predominant tool is feeling, but when I looked at the answers about the one about riding a bike, I immediately went to riding a bike. And I thought about that. I thought it's not because I have any desire to be physical. It's because when I think of riding a bike, I think about being alone and getting away from other people. And my experience of riding a bike when I was little was very much about feeling, about having time away and being in nature and doing things that I wanted to do and having quiet time. So I immediately thought about riding a bike. But and I compare that with the kids in my class also. I'll leap to sometimes a conclusion about what I think they're doing, but if I ask them or I look deeper into what their motivation is behind it, it often flips it to a whole
Thank you. That's another way to think of it. Not only is where does the joy flow, but what's the motivation for the activity. Great insight there. Mm-hmm. So before we end and have break, I just want to say 2 more things. And one is just to mention in brief that any of the tools of maturity can be overdeveloped, or developed in a negative way. So we've been talking about, positive things. But a person who develops one in isolation to the others, for example, physical skills, those are the people, the famous athletes that get arrested for outrageous behavior because they're, the feeling and the calm, clear intellect haven't been developed in conjunction with that incredible physical skill. You think about people who are overdeveloped in feeling and not balanced in everything else, and sometimes they can be hypochondriacs. They can be people who are developed in feeling, whose predominant tool is feeling, can be empathetic, compassionate, but they also, if it's turned inward, can be, what's the right word, self-centered. It's all about me and how I feel, Will, same thing with will. In positive willpower is about self-mastery. It's about being able to use the will to achieve your goals. But when it's negatively developed and people have the predominant tool of will, it can be developed in a way of trying to force others to do your will, and that's a bully. So that's that type of personality. And then the overdeveloped intellect are the people, I'm sure you've all known the kind of person who is, I don't like to use pejoratives but I'm going to say the word nerd, as it used to be meant, now it's a positive thing. A nerd's somebody who can handle technology, yes, come help us. But the person who had the 6 pens in their pocket but couldn't carry on a conversation and couldn't establish a relationship, and maybe they were actually quite lonely and would love to have. But everything, they can intellectualize about everything. They have wonderful ideas, but they can't bring it into manifestation on this physical plane. So that's the reason we want to help children develop them in balance. I know we had a family here at our school who had one of the most gifted intellectually kids that I remember that we've worked with, and it just shows all over the place. For example, he was on National Jeopardy, and he could have been in a school that was strictly for the gifted and being taught algebra when he was in 6th grade. But they had him here because they wanted him to have a balanced education and to develop feeling, heart, will, all of those things. And it seems to from what I can tell, it seems to, they tell me all the time how grateful they are for this school to give him the right foundation. We have students here now who qualify in this way, that the parents have them here because they don't want their child to become so one-sided and to get all their praise for just intellectual development so that they don't develop all parts of their being. Just close with a little story. The same teacher that I was talking about that we did the ropes course with, we did a field trip to the coast to a tide pool. We studied oceans and we went to a tide pool. And it was such a gorgeous day. And it was my first trip to a tide pool. I had never actually seen starfish and all those things in the wild, only in aquariums. We were all, I mean, you know, 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds, they're just still fresh. At least out in nature they are. And we were just having the best time. And everybody was sort of, we didn't have it tightly structured because, of course, in an Education for Life school, yes, we're going to learn about the structure and the processes and the metabolism of all these animals, etc., before we go, and we're going to learn biology. But when we're there, we want them to feel, don't we? We want them to enjoy. Felt so sorry for this group. There was another group there from another school who were sitting on the beach filling out worksheets. And we were all experiencing the life. And I had one little boy who was pointing at all the starfish, and that was the animal he had done his report on. And he was telling me every single thing about them, how long they lived, what they weighed, everything. He was so excited. Then I had this group run up to me with all these little hermit crabs. Look, Usha, what we caught. Look. And this one's Sammy, and this one's Annabelle, and this one's... And then I turned and looked, and the other teacher and 4 or 5 of the kids, my heart kind of went, because they had climbed one of those big rocks. And it's like, ooh, are they safe? Oh, yeah, they're with him. They're safe. And then I looked around and thought, oh, I get it. All the will and physical kids were up there on the rock. The intellectual child was telling me everything about the starfish, and the feeling kids were collecting hermit crabs and giving them names. And I thought, this is great, because then we can affirm who every child is. Another thing I remember, we had this child who had some academic difficulties, and her mother put her here. And yes, she did have some academic difficulties, but she was one of the most in-tune children to people I'd ever seen, and to the heart, to feeling. I remember one time when we were decorating the altar, and she just came in and just stood at the altar, and she was just transfixed by beauty. She just didn't say anything. And she's so into feeling that I remember another time, this is a feeling child in the feeling years now. Well, you know, you pull out a picture of a baby animal in front of a class of kids between 6 and 10, and almost all of them will go, aww, because they're in the feeling years. Now, if I did that right now, all of you who are in the feeling tool, or who've really been loose about expressing it, would all go, but many of you wouldn't. And so, but this, I expect children to do that about a baby animal, but let me tell you what she did it about. One time I took the recycle box, which Karen had lined with blue contact paper, and it had a sticker on it, you know, but it wasn't like it was some art piece. And emptied the recycling, and I put it in the office and forgot about it. And then one day I came in, oh, there's the recycle box. So I went to take it back in the classroom, and I walked in. This little girl looked up, and she said, oh, our recycle box. And I told her mother, and another thing is that she was the one I would ask after school if I'd seen a parent and I couldn't see them right now. I could say, do you know where so-and-so's mother is? And she'd say, oh yeah, she went over to the intermediate classroom. She was so attuned to everybody. And I told her mother, I said, this child is gifted. And her report card is never going to show it. But she has a gift, and I can think of lots of jobs that she could do that have to do with people skills, that she would surpass anyone who could make straight A's on the standardized test. So when we think about the tools of maturity and educating children holistically, what we're talking about really is recognizing their human nature and the way energy flows through them the most free. And then working with it, you want to lead with that with each child, because of course they're more willing to take risks in the areas they feel insecure about if they're getting positive encouragement in the areas that come naturally for them. So we want to affirm every child, and we'll talk more about how we encourage children this afternoon in their natural easy, preferred, most joyful tool of maturity, while at the same time encouraging them to take steps to be balanced in every tool.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! You're one of those people that can do that. Those.
This is the Will Station. Welcome. Welcome. And you know what, Usha, if you could close that door, I like all the energy to stay in the room. So, you have 3 choices here. Now the goal is, I have everyone's scores recorded. So your goal in your category is to get the highest number. So you have 3 choices. The first is to see if you can build the tallest structure, we count each level as 1, that can stand on its own. That's the first. The next one you can choose from is see how many words, use a piece of paper and a pencil, you can create out of this phrase. Okay? And the last one is you can draw a picture, but it has to be a picture, and you can see how many colors you can use. You want to use the most number of colors. On your marks, I'm going to set the timer. You will have 5 minutes to complete this. Actually 4.5 now. Get ready. Go to a station. Find what you would like to do. And you may begin.
So how many words we can get out of
How
it?
many words you can make out of this? Thanks.
Is it okay if I knock Melissa's over? Is that part of the will here?
Sorry, that does not comply with the regulations.